23. Bear Claws. Charlie pulled into the parking lot in front of Eclipse Piercing and Shadow Modifications in Amherst around 10 that night. It was in a strip mall, positioned between a Korean chicken place and a laundromat. Charlie parked in the back, against a thin copse of trees. The chilly night air carried the scent of beer and fried things from a bar one lot over. Grabbing a Dunkin' Donuts bag from the back seat, she went to the door near the dumpster, a red bulb burning above it. She knocked, knuckles hard on the wood. A sliver of light peeked out the edge of blackout curtains hanging inside the window. Moments later, a black woman opened the door. She wore a tank top and ripped jean shorts. Her curls were dyed the color of flames, with yellow at the root, red for most of the way, and little licks of blue at the tips. Tattoos covered her arms, from a dark-skinned moon goddess, new enough to be shiny with moisturizer, to older and less well-rendered spiderwebs, roses, and a skull with a serpent snaking through its eyes. Folding her arms across her chest, Raven regarded Charlie suspiciously. "I don't take walk-in clients, especially at this hour." "You had something stolen from you recently," Charlie said. "I want to talk to you about Night Singh and his book of observations. Tell me what I want to know, and you can have it back when I'm done with them. Less than a week, I promise." Raven narrowed her eyes, then stepped back so that Charlie could come inside. As Raven closed the door, Charlie saw the words, "El arte es largo y la vida breve," ran down the inside of her left arm in large Gothic script. Scabs dotted her legs, as from flea bites. Marks made by feeding her shadow. Charlie held up the Dunkin' Donuts bag. "I brought coffee, if it's any consolation." "Okay, thief, let's hear what you want." Raven poked around in the bag, then looked up. "Fuck yeah! You got bear claws." The first part of any con was winning someone's trust, and every conversation was a little like a con. Coffee and pastries couldn't hurt. "How did you wind up with his papers?" Charlie asked. "From what I heard, his death was unexpected." "You could say that." Raven raised her eyebrows and took a sip of coffee. "They found him in his home, on the rug near his desk. The walls were painted with gore. The Cabal didn't want anyone to know details. But I found out." Raven went on, not leaving space for comforting words or horrified astonishment. "Another Glomus said they heard a man's voice screaming. Someone other than Night. To do what was done to him required a kind of strength that could only come from a shadow. A very powerful one, glutted on energy and blood." "That's awful," Charlie said. Raven nodded. "Night was the first Glomus I ever met. The one that taught me how to use my magic properly. Got pissed when I decided I wanted to focus on alteration. Said I was chasing money. Maybe he was right. The thing was, though, he gave me that book a week before he was murdered. Told me to keep it safe. He had information that could bring down someone important. Holding it over that person's head kept him safe. And not just him. I guess he was wrong about that." "Lionel Salt?" Charlie asked. Raven gave her an odd look. "Maybe. That old man is a freak. Stole the shadow he's wearing. Lots of people are supposed to have disappeared into his house. If that's common knowledge, how come the Cabal never did anything? How come Night Singh never used what he had?" Charlie asked. Raven went to a cabinet near a kitchenette and took down a metal dog dish. "I've got a couple of things to do. Do you mind if I work while I talk?" Go ahead, said Charlie. Raven opened a mini fridge jammed into a corner behind the counter and took out a plastic bag of blood. She ripped open the edge with her teeth. Hand me one of those coffee mugs, she asked, nodding toward a sink where a few clean forks and cups rested on a scratched plastic drying rack. Charlie stared at her incredulously. You want me to do what now? Raven smiled. Mugs. By the sink. Get one. Charlie chose one at random. It read, Kick today in the dick. Raven poured the blood into the cup and then stuck it in the microwave, setting the timer for 1.5 minutes. To get the chill off it, she said, as though that explained anything. As the mug went around in circles, Raven turned to her. Nobody has any real proof. And Salt's rich. That's why the Cabal won't do anything. As for why Knight didn't use what he had, I don't know. Depends on what he had. You can't expect me to believe you didn't read through Knight's book while you had it, Charlie said. Raven smiled. Oh, I did. Lots of information, most more relevant to shadow wearers and alterationists. But absolutely nothing that seemed like it could take down anyone. Charlie frowned. Other than whatever Knight had, would Salt have any reason to want him out of the way? Knight was against his being a Cabal member, and now that Knight's gone, they're bending the rules and letting Salt join, even though Malik's already representing the puppeteers. So they're not going to have anyone from Carapace? Raven's gaze went to the mug, turning on the plate, her expression remote. It's not fair. Knight helped build the Cabal. He was one of the early Glomists to be open about shadow magic. Charlie opened her coffee and took a sip, thinking about Red and what Salt had said about Vince. What was Knight's connection to the Liber Noctum? He might not have one, but she hoped that by putting it like that, Raven would believe she knew more than she did. The Book of Blights? The microwave beeped, and Raven dumped the contents of the mug into the stainless dog dish. He thought it was hilarious that Salt got scammed into paying so much for it, I guess. That's the problem with rich Glomists. They buy up all the magical books because they can, and they use that knowledge to tie other Glomists to them. Salt wouldn't follow anyone's rules, and now he's going to be the one making the rules. There were stories of cults formed by Glomists in the early days of shadow magic becoming public. Lots of bloodletting to juice up their shadows. Lots of creepy robes and creepy sex. And in the end, lots and lots of death. When Charlie thought of what a Glomist organization run by Salt would look like, she imagined the high-class corporate version of those cults. But people would join. He had the books and the money. And the bigger his organization became, the more influence he'd have with the other Glomists. His seat on the Cabal would mean no one could stop him. Shoving the empty, blood-stained mug back into Charlie's hands, Raven went to the door and set the dog dish down on the step. Do I want to know? Charlie asked, eyebrows raised. You will in a minute, whether you want to or not. Raven appeared immensely amused. Why do you want to know about the Liber Noctum? Didn't Salt's grandson make off with that before he kicked the bucket? Why do you want to know any of this? Charlie flopped down on a bench near a stack of Flash magazines. Something's gone wrong, and I guess I'm caught up in it. I can't walk away now even if I wanted to, and I don't. What I really want to figure out is who's been lying and about what. Raven snorted. Probably all of them, about everything. Outside, a passing cloud changed the way the moonlight fell. Charlie saw a few shadows slipping toward the bowl. They were faint, indistinct things even as they moved into the strong light of the bulb over the door. Barely noticeable. But the area around the bowl grew ever darker as more congregated. The surface of the blood rippled, as though disturbed by some phantom cat tongue. Then it was all ripples. "There is one thing about the Liber Noctum," Raven said softly. Knight knew a guy at an auction house, and they let him put on white gloves and take a look before Salt bought it. He copied out some notes on the binding of blights, but nothing else. Could he have overlooked the ritual to give blights weight and form? Or had it seemed so terrible that he simply didn't want to know it? Charlie sat there, more frustrated than ever, watching blood drain from the bowl. The shadows thickened around it, dense and dark. "How about the Hierophant? He's supposed to be hunting down blights, and you said it must be a powerful shadow that killed Night Singh. It could be a blight, couldn't it?" Raven sighed and looked out toward the edge of the parking lot near the trees. "That guy, Stephen? I knew him a little before he was the Hierophant. It wasn't even that he was a bad thief. It was that he stole the wrong thing from the wrong person. The glomist who'd hired him hung him out to dry. Then they punished him by stitching that old blight to him and, well, I don't think things are going well. A shadow like that, conscious and whispering in your ear, creepy as fuck. I doubt he's going to catch anything." Charlie recalled Salt's comment about powerful blights being tethered to new wearers. She recalled the Hierophant's words, too. "Tell Red I want the book. Tell Red we can share. Tell Red that I will rip him to pieces." Why would a blight agree to be tethered? Charlie asked. Raven shrugged. "Most don't." Charlie gestured toward the bowl. "Those are blights, right? But giving them blood, that gives them power, right?" "A little," Raven agreed. "You're wondering why I'd want to do that." Charlie eyed them, thinking about Red and the Hierophant, and the feeling of a shadow making her mouth move. "I was actually wondering how much blood it would take to make a shadow powerful enough to be a blight without its glomist dying." "I'll tell you what," said Raven, standing. "I'll give you a demonstration of both." Her shadow shrouded her hand in what appeared to be a glove of fog. She reached out and plucked one shade up from where it licked at the bowl. It wriggled in her hand, but the other was holding what appeared to be a needle and thread, all formed from shadow. It continued to twist like an eel or jellyfish, or some internal organ dragged outside of the body. And also like none of those things. If you looked fast, it might seem that Raven was miming holding something, that she stabbed an imaginary needle into an imaginary thing. Charlie couldn't decide if she was more disgusted or fascinated. Raven saw her expression and smiled. "Every time an alterationist changes someone, we have to use some of our own shadow to do it. If we're not careful, we'll give ourselves away, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. But I'm careful. These little shadows, they're nothing. No cleverness in them, barely any consciousness. Might not even survive being stitched to a person. But you're right that, strictly speaking, they're blights. Shadows that have survived being apart from their wearer." On the steps, Charlie could see a few slinking off now that their feast was over, but some still remained, a translucent darkness, like a film in the air. This part might freak you out, Raven said. You can close your eyes if you want. There was absolutely no way she was going to look away like a coward. I'm good. Raven took the shadow and dropped it into her open mouth. Charlie bit her lip to keep from making an astonished sound. That hadn't been at all what she was expecting. Raven continued with a smile. When a Glomus puts a piece of their consciousness into their shadow, they grow a kind of homunculus. Power is only part of what makes a blight. If you don't want your shadow to be separate from you, don't consider it as separate. Never name it. And never feed it blood that's not yours, because that's giving it energy that also isn't yours. Charlie nodded. But most blights are formed on the deathbed. Glomists often push parts of themselves into their shadow in those last moments. Often all of their fear and pain. Scary things get made like that, but powerful things. To create a blight without that would probably require stealing energy. Maybe through someone else's deathbed and someone else's blood. Charlie thought of Salt and what he'd done to her, of her fingers around a knife. If it was powerful enough, could it control you? Could it puppet you? Raven studied her for a long moment. I've never heard of a shadow being able to control the person to whom it's attached. But there's only one way to be entirely safe. To have no shadow at all. The shadowless can't be controlled. There's a door shut inside them. The shadowless can't be controlled. Could that be why Vince cut his shadow loose? To avoid being puppeted by his grandfather the way she had been? To avoid being controlled by Red? Raven turned to Charlie. I think that's enough answers for you. And so help me, if you fuck me over, I'll make sure you wind up the next Hierophant, with something ancient whispering in your ear while you chase down blights until one of them catches you and devours you whole. I'll bring you Knight's papers, Charlie promised. Bring more bear claws when you do, Raven said, sending Charlie back into a night that felt more full of shadows than before. The next afternoon, Charlie sat at the kitchen table with pens in either hand and 2 sheets of notebook paper with tattered edges beneath them. In synchronized movements, she wrote the same words over and over on both pages. Hey, dummy, is your brain split yet? I didn't know you were ambidextrous, Posey said, frowning at her. Not sure I am, said Charlie. But maybe good enough is good enough. Posey got a seltzer out of the fridge and popped the tab. She leaned against the counter and watched Charlie write. Do you feel like your consciousness is bifurcating? Charlie sighed and stopped writing. I don't know. If it was, what could I do? Posey pointed to her shadow. Try moving your fingers. Those fingers, I mean. Charlie frowned in concentration, focusing on attempting to feel a hand that wasn't attached to her. But no matter how hard she stared or tried to shift her consciousness or tried to think in 2 places at once, there was no perceptible change. Posey shook her head. Okay, what about lengthening it? That seemed even harder to Charlie, but she complied, attempting to imagine her shadow spreading, like it was melting. She tried to make it ooze, even just to blur a bit at the edges. Again, nothing. I'm trying, she told her sister, forestalling any criticism. Maybe you could try to inhabit your shadow, Posey said. Charlie threw up her hands in frustration. What's that supposed to mean? Posey shrugged. They went on like that, with Posey looking up exercises online and Charlie becoming increasingly frustrated. Eventually, Posey had a Zoom call with a client, bringing their session to an end. Charlie was relieved to give up. She pulled out her own laptop and stared at the screen. With a sigh, she pulled up the article about Edmund Carver's death, copying over the name of the girl whose body was found in the car with his and putting it into the search engine. Rose Alaband. There weren't many mentions of her, the longest being from a week after she went missing. Family and friends of Rose Alaband are asking the public to share any information that could lead investigators to her location. Alaband, 23, went missing a week ago after what was described by witnesses as a heated argument with a friend. According to investigators, she'd been spending time with some new people. Her cell phone was found by the side of Interstate 91, just past exit 19B, with a SIM card removed. Alaband's mother extends this plea. Rose was a nice girl who trusted people too easily. She thought magic was all fun and didn't understand how people would use her for what she could do. I am terrified to think what might have happened to her. If anyone has seen my daughter or has any information about her whereabouts, please, we're begging you to call 911 and report anything, no matter how small. Vince could have had something to do with Rose Alaband's disappearance. He'd convinced Charlie to trust him, after all. She'd gotten in his van lots of times. A nice girl wouldn't have stood a chance. But to be that person, he would have to be what Salt had called him, a shapeshifter. Because the Vince she'd known was the kind of person who'd go to the store and get those stupid bran flakes because they were healthy, and Charlie had been wanting to eat healthier. Who'd patched up Charlie's cuts just because she'd been bleeding. But if Red had committed the murders, Vince would feel responsible. Red had been part of him, after all. Lucifer came over and butted her head against the edge of the laptop. Absently, she scratched under the cat's chin. Lionel Salt wanted Charlie to believe that Vince was planning to use the Liber Noctum to make his shadow into some kind of immortal monster. According to Night Singh, it wasn't worth what Salt paid for it. But the Hierophant sure acted like the book did something. If Salt were right, and Vince intended to do this ritual with Red, what was he waiting for? He'd had the book for a year, and it wasn't like he was a procrastinator. He didn't put stuff off. He was the only person in her household who had ever taken lint out of the dryer. Impulsively, she typed Edmund Carver plus Adeline Salt into the browser window. Scrolled through articles with more photos of them. Vince, with a scarf around his throat. Adeline hanging off his shoulder as though trying to appear far more sober than she was. A small smear of lipstick at the very corner of her mouth. Then, a gossip blog article with aerial photos of some people on a yacht. Charlie squinted. On the prow, two bodies were entangled with one another, half hidden by a shade sail. The woman's blonde hair was tossed to one side, and her bikini top was pushed up. The man was bent over her, but she knew him even without seeing his face. She knew them both. Adeline and Vince. Is heiress cheating on shipping tycoon? Charlie couldn't help remembering how Adeline had outright said she was glad he and Charlie weren't together anymore. And all those photos of Adeline and Edmund together at all those fundraisers, balls, and parties in New York. Never anyone else by his side, or hers. Couldn't help thinking of the photo in his wallet. Posey came in, leaning against the doorframe. She was holding a pack of worn tarot cards in her hand. "What are you looking at?" "Proof the Hall family curse is real," Charlie said, and closed her laptop. "How about you shuffle the deck and pick 3 cards?" Charlie gave her a look. "Oh, come on." "Think of tarot as a psychological tool," Posey told her. "Accessing the unconscious. Jung was all for it. And you need to get the part of your mind that's holding you back from being a glomist." "Fine," Charlie said, accepting the stack. She shuffled them as though she was about to play poker. "Concentrate on your question," Posey told her. "It helps if you close your eyes. Ask the cards what's blocking your magic." But what Charlie wanted to know was about Red. She flipped over the top 3 cards without looking and handed them to Posey. Maybe this is why people went to psychics in the end. Because they needed help and stopped caring how they got it. Any port in this motherfucking storm. "These are all major arcana," her sister said, frowning at them. "Interesting." "What does that mean?" Posey didn't look happy. "That something big is going on." "Okay," Charlie said uncertainly. "What else?" Posey set down the first card. The Magician. The conversion of the spiritual into material. It's a card of new beginnings. So I'm guessing this is about you being a glomist. "Nothing we don't know," Charlie said, although she was a bit impressed. Posey set down the second. The Fool. Charlie rolled her eyes. See how he's about to step off that cliff and is oblivious to the danger. I see. Charlie's sister looked at the final card, raised an eyebrow, and grinned. Ooh, looks like there's a taboo that you're in danger of breaking. Charlie frowned. Which card is that? Posey showed it to her. A religious figure sat on a throne in red robes holding up his hands as 2 monks knelt before him. The Hierophant. That night, Charlie went down to the basement and took out the aerial silk that she hadn't practiced on for months. The one that was supposed to keep her limber enough to slither through windows like the Grinch. She strung the cloth up on a hook, shook off the dust and at least one annoyed spider. Then she climbed in and went through the old exercises. The ones she used to do every morning before pickpocketing practice. She was stiffer than she used to be, but as her muscles warmed, she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. On the wall, her shadow followed every pose. 24. Sad songs on repeat. The next morning, Charlie brought a cup of coffee back to her mattress on the floor and finally returned the call from Rapture. They wanted her to come in the following night and then go back to working regular hours for the rest of the week. Charlie was fine with that, so long as she could take off Saturday for Salt's party. Book or not, she was going to have to attend. Then, after taking a huge sip of coffee, as the lazy golden light spilled over her worn sheets, she called the bursar's office at UMass. A grouchy-sounding woman picked up. "Can you look up my outstanding bill?" Charlie asked. "It's under Posey Hall." "Hold on," the woman said with a long, suffering sigh. Charlie bit the skin around the edge of her thumb, trying not to play out the worst possible scenarios. "It looks like you missed a deadline," the woman said. "There's a hold on your account." Charlie's heart kicked up. No, I had until the end of the month. I have the letter around here somewhere. End of last month, the woman said. For a moment, all Charlie could do was stare at the wall. It was possible that Doreen had gotten her brother to do this, but it was equally possible that Charlie had made a mistake. I can get it to you, she said. Monday. Monday, or you wash out and have to reapply for next semester, the woman said impatiently and hung up. Charlie flopped back on her bed, looking up at the ceiling, trying to convince herself to keep going. If she stopped, she might not get out of that bed for weeks. She dialed Vince's boss, a story ready. But as soon as he picked up the phone, he launched into a tirade. Tell that son of a bitch that he's dead to me. You hear that? You tell him that he can't just go on a bender and expect to have a job when he sobers up. He's not, Charlie started, but he'd already hung up. And even if he hadn't, he obviously had no idea where Vince was. 3 calls, 2 hang-ups. Maybe she'd lost her touch. Charlie sighed, letting her head fall back to her pillow. She missed him and wasn't sure she'd ever known him. She might be able to guess where Vince would go, but Remy Carver was an utter mystery. But maybe not to Dr. Liam Cloven, who'd sold 3 valuable books to Paul Echo, who'd obviously known a lot more than he'd let on. Charlie got up and started pulling off the sweatpants she'd slept in, her shadow following her motions. She watched it against the wall, stepping into panties, tugging its bra over its head, tying back its hair with an elastic band. We're magic, she whispered to her shadow, to herself. There was no response. Are you hungry? She asked. As she moved her hand to her leg, the hairs stood up on the back of her neck and prickled all along her arms. She hooked a nail under the hard edge of a scab and pulled at it, like she was ripping off a Band-Aid. Blood came sluggishly, beating up and running off her ankle. It never hit the floor. After a breakup, it was normal to listen to sad songs on repeat. It was normal to spend hours staring at old photos and letters, or burning them on the grill, or even drawing devil horns on every picture you could find of your ex. Normal to eat an entire carton of ice cream on the couch and wash it down with a bottle of Chardonnay. Normal to talk about the guy incessantly to your friends, to call his number just to hear his voice on the answering machine, and then hang up without leaving a message. But just because people did those things didn't mean they were good ideas. More like pressing a bruise to check if it still hurt. Going to bother your ex-boyfriend's roommate felt a lot like one of those things people did but shouldn't. It took a few more calls, but Charlie discovered that Liam Cloven was a resident at Bay State Medical Center. That made getting to him more difficult in some ways, and simpler in others. Charlie couldn't just make an appointment and confront him when he came in to treat her for her bunions or whatever. But medical residents are famously exhausted, and exhaustion means limited attention. Liam was going to be concentrating on his job, which meant that he'd have nothing left over to detect a trap before it sprang. Not only that, but Liam Cloven was on the cusp of all his hard work paying off. He'd sacrificed a lot of wild nights to get where he was, put in the time studying, took out loans. As a medical resident, he was so close to 6 figures that he must be able to taste them. He had plenty to lose. Charlie had practically nothing. There were several ways to waylay medical students, but the simplest was to hang out in the cafeteria around lunchtime. They might have lectures or other duties keeping them from a particular hour, but if she waited, he'd get hungry eventually. But to spot him, she was going to have to figure out what he looked like. Her initial searches online were fruitless. No photos of him with other medical residents at Baystate, although she scrolled through official images for the better part of an hour. He didn't seem to even have a Facebook. Finally, she discovered a picture of him in Remy's graduating class at NYU. There he was, Liam Cloven, red-haired, squinting against the sun. And not far off, Edmund Vincent Carver, looking straight into the camera. Charlie pulled out clothes she used for this kind of role. A pale blue turtleneck to cover her tattoos, her regular jeans, a brown bobbed wig that she could shove her hair under, neutral makeup. By the time she'd driven to Baystate Medical Center and parked as far out into the visitor lot as was possible, she'd slid into character. Inside, she gave her driver's license to the bored woman at the desk, and when asked, claimed to be meeting a cousin in the cafeteria. That part of the hospital was open to the public, so no one had any follow-up questions. She asked for directions at the gift shop, her gaze checking for cameras as she went. There were plenty. The Baystate cafeteria reminded her of the one at the community college where she'd taken 2 classes in psychology before dropping out and taking a 6-week bartending course instead. It had steel counters, no surface that couldn't be quickly wiped clean. The smells were familiar too. Reheated frozen things and gravies thickened with cornstarch, milky chowder, onions, and hazelnut coffee. Charlie found a table in a corner and waited. After the first half hour went by without incident, she got up and found herself a pre-packaged ham with Swiss on rye, a coffee, and a water. By the time Charlie returned, someone had snagged her table. She found a new spot, chewed, and checked her phone. She had an angry and possibly booze-soaked message from Adam on her real phone. "You bitch, you should have just left us alone. You think that Aureen is I to leave me because of what you said to her? Then you have another thing coming. She is as angry at you as I am, and maybe more now that I told her, wait, you tricked me and stole what was mine. She told me everything. Bitch, 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 I hope her you die." She set the cell down on the table, feeling as though it had bitten her. She ought to have seen that the situation was going to go bad once she'd lifted the book. Now, Susie Lampton had told her it was going to blow up in her face way before that. "I hope her you die too, fuckknuckle," Charlie thought, and deleted the message. She was trying to calculate just how much she'd screwed up when Liam Cloven walked into the cafeteria. He was pale and skinny, with a reddish beard. Since he was a classmate of Edmund's, she knew he had to be around her age, but the scrubs and facial hair made him seem older. Because he'd done something with his life. Not like her. Charlie Hall, spending half her time trying to blunt her fangs and the rest of it hunting. She waited until he'd gotten his food and found a table. "Hello," she said, sitting down next to him. "Mind if I sit here?" Now, some guys think that women con artists have it easy. That all they have to do is show some leg, like Bugs Bunny hitchhiking in drag, and the mark screeches to a halt, tongue lolling. First of all, that's not even a little bit true. And second of all, if a woman decides a low-cut top is necessary, that's because cons work differently for her. Offer a man a business opportunity and he's suspicious. Not that it's a con, but that because she's a woman, she doesn't know what she's talking about. It's a delicate business to act clever enough to be taken seriously and still make him feel like he can screw her over. And if he wants to screw her too, well, that's an even more delicate business. But while the disadvantages that a woman con artist had were manifold, there were advantages. For instance, women seemed less threatening. If a man had sat down across from Liam, he would have reacted differently. He might not want Charlie there, but he didn't seem worried she was dangerous. "No," he said, annoyed. "I mean, yes, I do mind. I really don't want company." She reached over and took his hand. He jerked it away from her, which made sense. Who wanted a total stranger grabbing you? Charlie let her eyes fill with tears. She pressed her fingers to her mouth in horror. "But it's the truth!" she sobbed, loud enough for people, including nurses and doctors, to hear her. He started to stand. No doubt he wanted to get away from her as quickly as possible, a totally reasonable reaction. The problem with reasonable reactions, though, was that they were easy to predict. She grabbed his wrist, and this time she spoke low enough that only he could hear. "Sit the fuck down, Liam Cloven, or I'm going to make such a scene that everyone in this room is going to believe that when you treated my dying father, I smelled alcohol on your breath. I am going to be loud, and I'm going to be convincing. Or you can tell me what I want to know, and I will act like you're a sympathetic doctor comforting a patient through a tragedy. You can even pick the tragedy, if you like." That was the other advantage women con artists had. The flip side of not being taken seriously. To the public, they looked like marks. "Who are you?" He was obviously furious, but he sat in the chair across from her. "What do you want?" "This won't take long," she said. "I just have a few questions about Edmund Carver." His frown deepened. "You were at my door the other day." She probably only had a few minutes before he managed to shake her. "Where is he?" "Dead," he said. "Try again," she told him. He started to stand. "I don't need to tell you anything." "Maybe you also got me pregnant," she mused. "This isn't a soap opera," he hissed. "Not yet it isn't," she told him, eyebrows raised. He glared, but he sat, put his head in his hand. Then he grabbed his sandwich and started taking it out of the plastic. "Look, he paid me to let him keep some stuff at my apartment and to use the address for mail he didn't want his grandfather to see. That's it." "What did he keep there?" Charlie asked, wondering if it could be this easy. "He had a closet with a padlock on it. It wasn't any of my business what he kept in there." "But you knew," Charlie said, hoping that if she sounded sure, he'd believe she was sure. "Some." Liam looked across the cafeteria, as though hoping to spot someone who could save him. "A spare phone, books from his father's collection, clothes, his driver's license. A fucking Krugerrand, if you can believe it. He was planning on leaving. I know that." "Then you, what, broke in there and sold his books to Paul Echo?" "He asked me to sell them," Liam said, a little too loudly. She smiled, to let him know that he'd screwed up, because the sale of those books occurred after Remy was supposed to be dead. "And when was that?" Liam sighed. "Okay. I saw him that night, okay? He showed up absolutely out of his mind. He was practically naked, wearing a woman's robe he told me he swiped out of a laundromat. Bare feet. It wasn't himself. Said he needed me to sell some books for him. I did it. I didn't know about the girl. I didn't know about any of it." "And then you helped him fake his death," Charlie said. "You got a body out of the hospital. Is that it?" "No!" Liam half stood before realizing how many people had turned to look at him. He sat back down, even angrier. "No, of course not. I had nothing to do with that. Any of it." What did he say happened to him? He shrugged. He didn't. What I worry is that he came from killing someone and got rid of his clothes because they were covered in blood. But back then, I figured his grandfather had thrown him out after he discovered Remy had a plane ticket booked for Atlanta. Something drove Vince away from that house. After years of going along with whatever monstrous business his grandfather was engaged in. On his own, he'd be broke after more than a decade of living like a prince. And he'd been poor enough that he wouldn't have any illusions about what that would be like, or how quickly a couple of grand of stolen money could get spent. What was in Georgia? Liam nodded, rubbed his face. His mother. She was the one whose letters he was trying to hide from his grandfather. She died of an overdose the night before he showed up at the apartment. It must have pushed him over the edge. Did he seem like the kind of person who could kill someone? Charlie knew the way she was asking was wrong, that it was giving him cover to deny it. She wanted him to deny it. Liam considered the question. Remy had a morbid sense of humor, but I've heard worse. I'm a doctor. Gallows humor is our thing. She smiled encouragingly. Anyone can do anything under the right circumstances, he went on. And look, one of the doctors that works here is known for being generous with the prescriptions. I saw Remy's cousin Adeline buy some ketamine off him. Rich partiers like prescription drugs. They're more expensive than street drugs, but come in safer formulations. And you're dealing with people unlikely to roll you. Who knows what Remy was into when he wasn't around me? Ketamine? Charlie's friends are more of a weed and oxy crowd. It makes you disassociative, Liam said. In lower doses, it confers feelings of euphoria. In higher doses, people enter a state not unlike a coma, except they're partially conscious. Sometimes unable to speak, they can have hallucinations and memory loss. Charlie wondered what had been in her drink all that time ago. And that's enough for me, Liam said, moving to stand. I don't know where he is, and I don't know where the book is either, okay? The book? Charlie echoed. Liam snorted. You think you're the first person to come around looking for it? Or him? 2 months after Remy showed up half naked, this young guy comes by, muttering to himself. Never taking his hands out of his pockets, threatening me. There have been other visits since, too. If I knew where Remy was, I would tell the police, not any of you. Charlie took out her phone and flipped to a photo of her with Vince. They were at the Lowe's in Hadley on Throwback Friday, waiting to see The Bride of Frankenstein. It wasn't a great picture. He was a little blurry. But it was still obviously him. I was his friend. See? Liam appeared visibly relieved. I still don't know anything. Remy's gone. He mailed me something. Charlie reached into her pocket and took out a tiny key. It was actually to a music box her mother had given Posey, but it was small and silver and might have gone to anything. And said that if anything happened to him, I'd know where to look. But I have no idea where to even start. He insisted it was important, that it had something important in it. I was hoping it would prove he was innocent. If you can't help me find him, you can help me find that. It wasn't the worst story Charlie had ever come up with. Liam frowned, considering. Back in college, Remy's grandfather would yank him out for weeks at a time, on a whim. And when Remy came back, he'd be a mess. What kind of mess? Charlie asked. Angry, Liam said. But because he didn't know when it was going to happen, he hid stuff, even back then. He used to talk about how there are places rich people will never see, even if they're staring right at them. If he really hid something, he would hide it in a place like that. Charlie wondered if, when Liam was a surgeon and rich, he would look past those places too. Wondered if that was the dream. She reached across the table to put her hand on his arm, trying to radiate sincerity. Thanks for talking with me, even though I pressured you into it. Remy always said you were a good guy. Liam gave her a sad smile. I thought he was too. Out in the parking lot, the sun had sunk low and red behind the buildings. Charlie checked the time on her phone. One more night before she had to be back at Rapture. 4 more days before Salt wanted his book. Liam's description of the person who'd been looking for Vince had matched the Hierophant. She knew he wanted the book and had apparently been wanting it for a while. But what she still couldn't figure was, lies aside, what all these people actually wanted the thing for. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. A man was behind her, his footfalls faster the closer he got. 25. Black cat, toad, crow. There's a moment of dissonance when people break the social contract. A moment when the civilized mind searches for some reason why a person might be running toward you that doesn't mean they're out to get you. Luckily, Charlie's mind wasn't particularly civilized. She raced for her car. He chased after, boots thudding dully on the asphalt. She ran full out. 8 hours on her feet most nights meant her leg muscles were no joke. But he was already too close and had momentum on his side. He caught her arm, spinning her around. She stumbled against her car and looked up into his face. Adam? His eyes were bloodshot and his breath could peel paint. But it was him nonetheless. He grabbed hold of her wig and tugged hard. It ripped loose, pulling pins and hair with it. Charlie Hall, you miserable, monstrous bitch! Thought you were going to con me and then rob me? Yeah, something like that, Charlie said evenly, meeting his gaze. No point in denying it. He hit her, knuckles hard against her cheek. The back of her head hit the window of her car. She would have fallen, except her fingers caught the handle of the door and she was able to hold on and stay mostly upright. He punched her in the stomach. All the air went out of her. She curled around the pain like a pill bug. Charlie might talk tough, but she had never been in a real fistfight. Even with her sister, they'd mostly resorted to hair pulling and the occasional mean scratch. Think, Charlie, she told herself, but shock and pain dulled her thoughts. Where's the book? He shouted. Give it to me! Gone, she managed. I am going to break your face, he told her. Your ugly fucking face. I am so sick of hearing about you. Everyone thinks you were so great, but I'm better. You hear that? I was always the best. She spat at him. Saliva sprayed his cheek. He flinched in surprise, closing his eyes, giving her a moment to tear out of his arms. Racing around to the other side of her car, she jerked open the door. He grabbed her throat. And then she was in 2 places, as though there were more than 3 dimensions to the world. Her consciousness split. She was both the person screaming and trying to claw at his hand, and she was something else, which rammed into him from the side. Her shadow. She felt a pull somewhere in the center of her, and she saw it. A figure all of darkness, as though someone cut a hole in the universe. Her, and not her. A mirror that reflected back no light. He stumbled, and her butt hit the seat before he got hold of her again. Animal instinct took over. Her body went wild, kicking and screaming. One kick landed against his upper arm, another scraped his knuckles. He howled in pain and let go of her. Charlie yanked the door shut. She slammed her hand down on the lock button. The clicking sound from all 4 doors felt deafening. Adam pulled on the door handle and Charlie had a horrible moment of being sure that it would open. He beat his fists against the glass window. She just sat there, her fingers running over the steering wheel. He was shouting at her, but her mind felt far away, numb with shock. Even though she'd known Adam was terrible and that she'd robbed him, she'd underestimated the danger. A year out of the game and she was fucking up left and right. Though it was dormant, there was something new between Charlie and her shadow, a buzzing of sensation, an almost umbilical connection, a phantom limb, a homunculus. With shaking hands, Charlie rooted out the key from her bag. Thankfully, the car roared to life. Adam pounded on the hood, and Charlie gave him a momentary warning of revving the engine before hitting the gas. He reeled back just in time to avoid being hit. Heart thundering, Charlie steered herself out of the parking lot. At the first red light, everything looked a little hazy, as though she was seeing it through a Vaselined lens. She realized her eye was starting to swell. Also, she thought she might be having a slight panic attack. She pulled over at a gas station about a mile away and checked her face in the mirror. Her left eye was purpling. Her mouth was cut, upper lip swollen like an esthetician had gone ham with a needle full of filler. Charlie was a mess. There were enough people wanting to knock her around that they were going to have to take a number, like at a deli counter. And what had it taken out of her shadow? She remembered Vince's words about unspooling, remembered that it was freshly quickened, with no reserves of energy. She had to feed it. Charlie couldn't remember where she'd first seen an image of a witch feeding her familiar from a third nipple. She recalled a woodcut, or an illustration meant to look like one. It must have been in the research she did for the Inquisition, back when she was Alonzo. As a kid, Charlie hadn't believed third nipples could be real until she looked them up. It turned out they could show up anywhere on the body. Imagine having a nipple on the back of your calf, or on the knuckle of your finger. It made her think of a pronouncement some misogynist barstool scholar once made with great seriousness. Martinis are like breasts. 1 is too few, and 3 are too many. Which was bullshit. Ask anyone who'd been through surgery to remove a tumor, or any fan of science fiction, or anyone who liked martinis. Ask her shadow, which was curled around her, nursing as tightly on her skin as any familiar. Black cat, toad, crow, spirits sent from the devil to make mischief in the world. One wound was fine for it, although even a few drops of blood are hard to squeeze out when your scabs were shallow and are healing. "You're okay," she soothed, as though to a child after a fall. "You're okay now, right?" So hard not to think of it as a separate thing. So hard not to treat it like one. So hard not to love it, or not feel responsible for it. It settled back into place, a cloak on her back, a carpet at her feet, a veil. Real magic. Her magic. It was never great to get punched in the face, but Charlie found herself smiling through her split lip. Until she realized that to have followed her from the hospital, Adam must have tailed her to the hospital, which meant that he knew where she lived. And as angry as he was, he might drive straight there. She picked up her cell and, cradling it painfully against her cheek, called Posey. It rang and rang. "I know you're awake," she muttered. Posey's voicemail started up. She must be Zooming with a client. Charlie tried her again, letting it ring, hanging up, and calling right back. Finally, Posey picked up. "Charlie, You've got to get out of the house. Now." "Why do you sound so weird?" Charlie didn't have time to explain about her swollen lip. "Seriously, now, a coffee shop, the drugstore, doesn't matter where. Just pick up your laptop and your wallet, go out the back door and hop the low fence into our neighbor's yard, the one with the trampoline." "What?" "I am going to stay on the line while you do it." "I'm in the middle of a card reading," Posey protested. "It's got to be right now," Charlie said. "Gimme a sec." Charlie could hear her talking to someone in a conciliatory way, although she couldn't make out the words. Hopefully explaining to her client that she had to go. She came back a moment later. "You know I can't drive." "I will be with you the whole way," Charlie said, keeping her voice calm and low. Radio voice. Hostage negotiator voice. "I promise. I'm coming to pick you up." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "Please, Posey." So much for staying calm. "Hurry!" "Fine. The backyard? So you're not visible from the street." Charlie wanted to get on the highway and race toward home, trying to beat Adam, but she knew it was better to focus on getting her sister out of the house. Just, quick. As Posey moved through the house, grabbing some things she said she needed and herding Lucifer into a cat carrier, Charlie dug her fingernails into the mound of her thumb. She wanted to scream at Posey to move faster. She wanted to do anything but sit there in the parking lot, hurt and powerless. Some huffing and rustling later, Posey said, "Okay, I'm outside with the cat. I'm heading toward the back." "Go over the fence," Charlie said. "You're almost gone." "You've got to explain." "I will. I promise. And I'm sorry." "What if the neighbors—" "Just keep going. Don't look back. Go, go, go." "Okay," Posey said, sounding fragile. "I'm over the fence. You know I hate walking through someone else's property. What if Elias comes outside and yells at me for cutting through his yard?" "You're doing great. All you have to do is keep going. Avoid the main roads and cut through to—" Charlie tried to think. There were a lot of streets crisscrossing around there. It would be easy to choose the wrong one. She didn't think Adam knew what Posey looked like, but a woman with a cat carrier was hard to miss. There was a Williston library one way, attached to a private high school for rich kids that had perks like riding horses. Posey might be able to talk her way inside, but she'd have to deliver her story with conviction. In the other direction was a Dunkin', a lunch place that would already be closed, a tattoo studio called Needle Ink, Union Package liquor store, and Glory of India, which mostly did takeout. "You should have come out on Clark, so cut through the parking lot on School Street. You're going into Union Package. Browse the wines until I get there." "What if they don't allow pets?" Posey asked. "Then we'll figure out something else. There's a Walgreens that's not far." Charlie waited, listening to the sound of Posey's breath, until she heard the jangle of the bell on the shop door. "You're coming right away?" Posey asked in a hushed voice. "Right away," Charlie confirmed, and hung up. This was why she'd stayed away from glow mists, away from cons and heists of magic. How had she not yet learned the lesson of juggling knives? Even when you kept them all in the air, You still cut yourself on the blades. She glanced at her shadow one more time, trying to shift her perception toward it. It flickered in response. Okay, she said, and pulled out of the gas station. Her car sped down the highway, the rattling of the engine barely noticeable. Whatever Vince had done held even as she pressed down on the gas and wove around delivery trucks and commuters. Her swollen eye made it hard to switch lanes to the left, and a pickaxe of a headache cleaved through her thoughts, which were mostly a litany of what else could go wrong. What if Adam decides he needs a shot of courage before he busts into my house and goes into the nearby liquor store? What if he is following my car right now? What if he has an accomplice? What if Lucifer pees in the cage and gets Posey kicked out at just the moment when... Charlie pulled up to the curb and fought down a wild urge to jump out of the car. Keeping the engine running, she called Posey. Her sister picked up on the second ring. "I'm out front," Charlie said, feeling out of breath despite having done nothing more than drive. Maybe she'd cracked a rib. A few minutes later, Posey emerged with a bottle wrapped in a paper bag, an overstuffed backpack on her shoulder, and the cat crate swinging from her hand. She climbed into the back. Lucifer let out a miserable yowl as her cage was unceremoniously dumped into the seat well. "I got both our laptops and some wine for Mom." "Mom?" Charlie echoed. But Posey had lost interest in that line of conversation. She was gaping at Charlie in the rearview mirror. "What happened to your face? And who are you afraid is coming to our house? Is it Vince? Did he threaten you?" "Vince?" Charlie gave her sister an exasperated look. Posey frowned. "I don't know. Was it the Glomus from Rapture?" Charlie shook her head, pulling away from the street. She needed to put some distance between them and anywhere close to her house. "That guy's dead." "What?" Posey's eyes widened. "What do you mean, dead?" "Check behind us. See if anyone's following," Charlie told her. Posey shrugged off her backpack and turned around, kneeling up on the seat. She looked pale and a little sweaty. "How am I supposed to tell?" "You keep watching. Not just the cars behind us, but the cars behind them. I don't know. I've only seen it done in movies." Charlie took a turn. "No one follows the exact same route, especially the one I'm going to take, doubling back on the same roads. So if they stay with us too long, we worry." "Okay," Posey said, staring. "Are you okay?" Charlie asked, her gaze on the road. "Of course I am," Posey said. "You're the one with the face that's swelling like a balloon. Now, will you explain?" "Doreen has this on-again, off-again boyfriend named Adam," Charlie started. "The guy you were texting," Posey said. Charlie nodded, remembering her sister grabbing her phone on Wednesday, back when it had seemed as though she wasn't going to blow up her life again. "So Doreen beat you up? For messing around with her boyfriend?" "No, are you serious? Adam was pissed because I ratted him out and stole something from him." Put like that, it did sound bad. "Which he deserved. And that thing I stole, he stole first." "I don't think anyone's following us," Posey told her, slumping down and returning to a normal, legal seated position. "Can we go home?" Charlie shook her head. "Let's give Adam a night to cool off, where he doesn't know where I am. I'll talk to Doreen. She'll calm him down." Posey frowned at the window, clearly unhappy. Charlie sighed. "Sorry about your client." "You know that Vince knew about Adam, right?" Posey said. "That I was conning him?" Charlie cut her gaze to her sister in the mirror. "How could he?" "Okay, knew was the wrong way to put it. He thought he knew about Adam. Just come out with it, Charlie said. He heard me reading off your phone. You know, about meeting Adam in private. Charlie felt sick. Did he say something? He asked me if I saw when you were going to have the meeting. Posey looked deeply uncomfortable and said that I was right about him, that I'd been right all along. And what did you say? Nothing, Posey told her. I was too surprised. I really didn't think he noticed what I said or what I thought. And I guess maybe I wasn't fair to him. Now you think that? Charlie had to force her foot away from the gas. So strong was her impulse to take out her feelings on the road. Posey shrugged. He was too calm. I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to hurt you. I mean, hot-built guys are supposed to be assholes. I figured he was probably bad news. But in the end, even though he was a huge liar, I think he might have been your most successful relationship. Charlie briefly contemplated driving them both off the road and straight into a tree. I wasn't the only one who lied. He'd said that when they were fighting. Now, much too late, she understood what he'd meant. I couldn't give you what you needed. I kept things from you. Even if you didn't know what was wrong, you could tell there wasn't enough of me. On Friday morning, when he'd gone to Rapture to pick her up, had he known she was supposed to meet Adam? She'd thought he was there because he'd been worried her car wouldn't start. But what if he'd been there expecting to find her with someone else? I wish I could say I was sorry, that I wanted to be honest the whole time, but I didn't. I never wanted to be honest. I just wanted what I told you to be the truth. Charlie had always believed that nothing really touched Vince, because everything he really cared about had been left behind in his old life, the one he was exiled from, the one to which he longed to return. But it was entirely possible that he'd hated his old life, and that she'd lost more than she ever realized she had.